In this video, we are going to take a look at a repair method you might be able to use if you have a crowned joist instead of a sagging joist. I have plenty of videos on sagging floors. However, I think this is going to be the first one where I take a look at the exact opposite problem. So here you can see where we have one joist that instead of sagging, it is actually sticking up or crowned. And most of the time, crowned joist will straighten out or kind of flatten in the same way that a straight joist might sag. And let's go ahead and remove the lower walls for a better viewing opportunity and then install our floor sheathing. Now, the first thing I want to point out is that if you need to cut the sheathing, you could end up reducing the structural strength by staggering the floor sheathing. If you're dealing with plywood or OSB, if you're dealing with 1x6, then you could still be dealing with the same situation. Now, here's what I'm talking about. Let's say I got one crown joist and I need to remove the sheathing so that I can either use a planer or a saw, something to straighten the joist out. And you can see here where something like this could create a problem with the reason why the engineer wants us to lap our floor sheathing. But I'm not going to rule this out if you are going to do something like this and cut it back to the next joist on either side, because this is the only option you have. I get it. And if you don't have the room or you don't want to cut that much of the floor out, you could always cut a smaller section and then add additional joist or install some type of blocking and structural support system like we have here. And I'm just kind of throwing this out there as a method that might work. Remember, I'm not a structural engineer, won't be able to provide you with something that will work for your specific project. And these are just suggestions. So here you can see where if we came across and intersected the crown joist, you can see where the problem is right here. This much of the joist is going to need to be removed to straighten it out. And if you don't remove enough of the floor sheathing, you're not going to be able to run a circular saw through here. However, you might be able to use a planer. And of course, I'm not talking about a hand plane. You're probably going to want to grab an electric plane for something like this. And to figure out just exactly how much of the joist we need to remove, we could always use a straight edge. Place the straight edge on top of the existing floor sheathing, and then grab a scrap piece of floor sheathing or a board that would be the same thickness, or you could even use your measuring tape to figure out exactly how much of the joist needs to be cut. And another thing you could do would be to place the scrap piece underneath the level. Then you can mark it. And again, you can always use your measuring tape for this. Put a pencil mark on the joist. With the pencil mark on the joist, you can simply move it back a little bit and mark it again, and keep repositioning it to mark what needs to be cut. I wouldn't suggest marking one end of the joist and then going over and marking the other end, and then grabbing a chalk line and snapping a straight line. If you do that, make sure that you check it in other spots, because sometimes the floor is going to be sagging or it won't be perfectly straight, and this could create a problem for you. So at least use this method to double check any other method that you are going to use. And this method might not be effective if you have multiple floor imperfections, crown joist, sagging joist, stuff like that. In the next example, we are not going to cut the floor sheathing or the lateral strength that is created from it. However, we will be cutting the floor joist. And of course, I will not be able to provide you with the amount of cuts you are going to need. That's going to depend upon the damage of the joist, how much of a crown it has in it. However, we are going to cut one in the center, one in the center between the center and the edge, and of course this one here, so that we'll have 4 equal sections of the joist that are being cut. And of course, something like this could be difficult if you're dealing with a crawl space. It's going to be a lot easier if you're working in a basement. After you have cut the existing joist, you can install a new joist next to it. You will not be nailing into or bolting any of this together until it's straightened. You might be able to drive a few nails in or screws at the end and even place some blocks in between the existing joist and the new joist. Just make sure that you don't nail it to the existing joist until you've pulled it down into the proper position. And that might look something like this. Now, I want to point out that since the new joist is straight and the existing joist is curved, that you might need to pull it down a little bit further to prevent something like this. So if we go to the other end, it's going to line up. The bottom's probably going to line up with the bottom, unless the lumber sizes are different. Keep in mind that the existing lumber could have shrank and the new lumber might be 1/4 of an inch or even a 1/2 inch wider than the existing lumber. And if that's the case, you won't be working from the bottom of the joist. You'll be working from the top or underneath the sheathing. And another thing to be aware of is when you reposition the joist, you should have a gap at the bottom, not at the top, because you're going to be pulling this board down. So you could have a slight gap at the bottom, and sometimes these boards will bind from the pressure, so be aware you might need to make these gaps a little wider. And I'm not about to suggest you can't remove these pieces, just as long as you're going to be able to attach the sheathing to the new joist. If you're going to make this repair without removing any of the flooring inside the house, then you won't be able to remove the existing joist because you're going to be relying on the nailing from the existing floor sheathing into the existing joist to attach that joist to the new joist to create a transfer. So keep that in mind as another repair option also. If you're having a difficult time, you could simply cut the joist out and replace it as another option. Just make sure that you re-nail the existing floor sheathing to the new joist. Otherwise, you're going to end up with some floor squeaks. Next up, let's go ahead and install our sheathing, remove a couple of walls so that we can get a better look at one of the biggest problems you're going to run into when trying to install your new floor joist. And that's the fact that you might not be able to install a full-length joist. And if it does need to be smaller, remember the minimum distance required by most building codes for a joist to be sitting on top of a wall will be 1.5 inches. And I do have a variety of other videos in our crawl space repair section. Click on the repairs tab at the website, then crawl space. I've got a bunch of videos on how you can solve this problem in a variety of different ways. So again, if you need to make the joist a little smaller on each end and then maybe slide this section in first and then slide the joist over on top of the wall or the beam on the other side. And remember, you're not going to have a sag. A sagging floor is going to create a problem for this method. However, a crowned floor joist should allow you plenty of room to reposition the new joist that's going to be straight. So don't forget to check out some of our other videos at our website on floor framing repairs, crawl space repairs. And even though I don't think it's going to be that big of a problem to pull the joist down, you could always use a lever type of system, maybe attach a board to the joist with some screws. Just make sure that your screws do not go into the new joist. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to move the joist very easy. And if you're working alone, you can always do something like this. Grab a board and then use another board, something like this, once you get it into the position you need it to, so that you can firmly attach the new joist to the existing one. And another method might be to use something like this. Grab a scrap piece of hardware, or even make your own hardware. Drill a hole through maybe a 4x4. And again, if you're going to be using some screws, make sure that they do not go into the new joist. And with this system here, it shouldn't be difficult to just simply run a bolt through here, go down to the other side, and start tightening the bolt up until you get it into the right position. Now, another thing you might need to do will be to place a 3/4 inch spacer on top of the 4x4 at both ends, so that this board will be a little bit lower if you need to pull the existing joist a little bit lower. And if one isn't working, you might need to use 2 or even 3 to bring the floor sheathing down and remove the crown in your floor. And as always, if some of this made sense or all of it made sense, let us know either in the comment area or by hitting the thumbs up button.